With every yearling sold at the Karaka yearling sales, purchasers have the opportunity to have the horse undergo an endoscopic examination to determine the presence of certain conditions. I spoke to Matamata Veterinarian Andrea Ritmeester about what the examination involves. Andrea, in 1995, New Zealand Bloodstock introduced scoping or endoscopic examinations of yearlings at the sales following the purchasing of them through the ring. First of all, tell us, what is scoping and why is it used?
Using the endoscope, basically we're putting a very small, long camera up the horse's nose so that we can look at all the structures in the throat. And it gives us an idea of how they're formed and whether they have any congenital abnormalities that might affect them being able to function as a racehorse.
And what are some of the most common abnormalities you find?
There are a number of conditions that we look for. Probably the most common thing we look for is a condition called hemiplegia, which is where one or the other side of the throat is not functioning properly. It's a partial paralysis of the muscles that open the entrance to the windpipe. So if there is a partial paralysis and the horse is unable to fully open its windpipe, then when it's running, it obviously isn't going to get enough oxygen, and that's a condition that will certainly affect performance. We also look for a condition called chondritis, where they have inflammation of the cartilages and they get swollen. They can at times even develop lumps of granulation tissue like proud flesh, which will be coming off of the cartilages and blocking the airway. And obviously that's going to affect the horse's ability to breathe. We look for displaced palate, soft palates, which is uncommon but occasionally seen. Entrapped epiglottis, where you get tissue wrapping itself around the epiglottic cartilage and again interfering with the horse's function of the throat. We also look for cleft palate and a condition called rostral displacement of the palatopharyngeal arch, which is a congenital malformation of the throat. The horses are born with that abnormality and they typically don't perform well as racehorses. So those are the sort of structural abnormalities that we look for in the horses post-sale, just to rule out the chance of a purchaser buying a horse that's got a problem that's going to stop it being a functional racehorse.
So Andrea, what's the process of a stationary scoping and how do you read one?
Scoping at rest basically means just that, is that we take the horse and we put the scope up its nose and we look at how it is functioning without exercise. So we do several things to make the horse swallow and to make the horse take bigger breaths, and one of the things we do is make them swallow, because typically after a horse swallows the next breath will be quite a big one, so it gives us a chance to assess function even though the horse is not exercising. The other thing that we do is we will occlude their nostrils and stress them a little bit, and when they start to run out of oxygen again they will often try to take bigger breaths, and so we can assess the function of the cartilages even though the horse is not exercising. However, it is limited because there are certain conditions that only show up when the horse is working. It certainly allows us to look at a lot of the structural components of the throat and pick up certain conditions which are developmental in origin. So, it's very useful, but it is limited in some ways.
You use a system called the lane system where horses are graded, grade 1 being perfect, through to grade 5, which is paralysis. What grade are the majority of yearlings you see making?
The majority of yearlings at the sale will be a grade 1. By far the majority of the horses are completely normal, but the ones that have beginning to show problems will come in for me to videoscope, and we will then grade them. Most of the horses that we see would be a grade 3, where they are a little bit asymmetric, but they still have full function at this stage. Very occasionally, about 1% of yearlings that we see will be a grade 4, which is where they have lost sufficient function that they're no longer able to fully open their airway, and those horses would fail the scope.
So Andrea, how does the process work of the scoping of a horse post-sale?
Basically, the purchaser notifies the auctioneer whether they want the horse scoped or not, and most people do. So what happens then is the horse will go back to its box, and we have a number of auctioneer-approved veterinarians going around the boxes doing the scoping, and they will look at each individual horse and they will then assess that horse for the conditions that we talked about, that we look for. Now, if that horse has any one of those conditions, it'll get sent up for a video scope, and a panel of 3 veterinarians, including myself, will look at that horse and we will assess its function. Now, if we deem that that horse fails the conditions of sale by having one of these conditions that is listed, we will notify the auctioneer that the horse has failed, and then they will go ahead and they will notify the purchaser. The purchaser then has the right to back out of that sale. They don't have to take the horse. They still can if they want, but they don't have to. And if they back out, obviously the horse will go back to the vendor.
What percentage of sales are you seeing follow that path?
When we looked at large number of horses over a large number of sales, is we fail about 1.5% of horses. Okay, so typical yearling sale, they might have 1,400 horses sold. So you're looking at about somewhere between 15 and 20 horses is usually the number that will fail on the day. Probably about half of those are inflammatory conditions which we deem are readily treatable, and we do certainly try and broker the delayed sales for those, just to, basically so that the vendor still gets their sale and the purchaser still gets their horse. So that's the way the system works. So when you're looking at total numbers, the number of horses that fail and are deemed to have a serious problem that can't be readily fixed is actually very small.
Next week we take things a little further and look at the use of the dynamic endoscopic examination on racehorses. Well, it's now time for Kiwi Bred Abroad, where we link up with New Zealand Bloodstock's Richard Haynes in Australia.
Hello and welcome to Kiwi Bred Abroad, brought to you by the Singapore Turf Club, racing every Friday and Sunday. Well, there are a number of young Kiwis doing some good things here in Sydney at the moment, and one of those is Bruce Slade. Let's catch up with Bruce to see how he's enjoying his working life in Sydney. Well, Bruce, with the beautiful backdrop here of Coogee Beach in Sydney town, in a nutshell, how are you enjoying your working life in Sydney?
Well, Richard, it doesn't get much better really. You know, we've come over here for great racing and of course the good weather and the beaches and everything like that. I'm sure you agree, the restaurants and everything is a great place to live, and you know, lots of opportunities, and yeah, one step at a time, but so far so good in Sydney for sure.
You've been here for a few years now. Let's take you back a little way, because you were with New Zealand Bloodstock for a number of years. An opportunity came up with the Gay Waterhouse stable. Was it a hard call or an easy call to make that jump to go to Gays?
Oh, it was a big call for me. You know, I'd obviously had a very good relationship with Andrew and Patria at New Zealand Bloodstock, and you know, they'd given me some terrific opportunities, being able to be Bloodstock agent for the South Island, and I was starting to do a bit of auctioneering there, which started down at the Pukekohe markets. It was a bit of a it made it pretty quickly, to be honest. Gay I was literally bid spotting one day there at Karak, and she walked down and said to me, "Young man, my name's Gay Waterhouse, I'd like to offer you a job." And obviously she's someone I had a lot of respect for. I said, "Gay, can I please think about it?" She said, "Don't think about it, just come." And it was as easy as that. She sort of had some faith in me. I was keen to have a look at the racing side of the game as well. And yeah, I popped over and off we went.
It's a great role with Gays for a young man, a racing manager's role. What have you learnt from it? And some great experiences, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. Richard, you've been there and you know all about it. You learn a lot in a very short space of time, and I think that's the key. Gay's happy to throw you responsibility, let you find your own feet, and you know, make the job your own. And you know, not only dealing with terrific clients, but with terrific horses, high quality bloodstock, high quality communication. And the number one thing I think I learned from Gay and the operation was just the importance of a very strong team, and also the importance of making sure that the owners had the best possible racing experience. And I tell you what, we had some fun, that's for sure.
There have been a few highlights. Does one stand out in your time so far here in Sydney?
Listen, wow, we've had some great times. I think close to 20 Group 1 wins, and every Group 1 was just terrific. You know, the first crop of yearlings that came through that I was, you know, part of the team in selecting, the likes of Piero was a terrific story, and following him through, that was probably a career highlight horse. And of course the New Zealand horses, when I first came over here, Desperado, he won the Caulfield Cup my first season here, and that was just unbelievable with a terrific bunch of owners there too. So Desperado, Piero, More Joyous, they sort of spring to mind, yeah.
Now, give us an idea about your future, Bruce. I mean, some exciting times ahead for you. Give us a bit of an idea of your new venture that you've just embarked on.
Yeah, well, I thought it's sort of the right time to do it is now. I'm young, don't have many responsibilities outside of myself, so I take a chance. I've always been really keen on getting people involved in this game. I think we're so lucky to be involved in it. So basically looking at a company called Roundtable Racing, which will be still closely associated with Gay, building together partnerships of like-minded people to hopefully just give them the absolute best racing experience by putting them to the best quality bloodstock we can, and making sure the racing experience is just second to none. It's such a special sport. I just had on the weekend Ecuador won, a New Zealand bloodstock purchase, and the people involved there, some people there have got a very tough time outside of their racing, and their racing sort of their getaway, and there are people in tears, and there's not much in life that can give you the thrill that racing does. I think that's the message that I've got to deliver to people that aren't involved in racing, and when they do become involved, make sure they have the best, absolute best experience and best time along the way, and show them our great sport. And I think the racing's got so much to offer, and I can't wait to start spreading the word, really.
Well, it was great to catch up with Bruce, and he certainly has some exciting times ahead for the future. We wish him all the very best of luck with this new venture. That's Kiwi Bred Abroad, brought to you by the Singapore Turf Club.